Okay.
All right, I think we're going here. It is the 12th of June, and I have with me today Stacey Campbell, who, of the few calls that I've done so far, you're actually the person I personally know the least. We worked on one case together a couple years ago, and what I remember from that, and obviously I won't talk about the case itself, but as you remember, I was representing a young black man who had filed a claim, and even though you were on the other side of that case, I have never forgotten how you spoke to him essentially after the case was all but over, and your sense of fatherly kindness that you spoke to him and in a teaching moment has stayed with me long after that case was over.
Oh,
And
good.
so as I've been trying to learn more about what's going on in the world right now with the state of race relations, you were one of the early people I thought of, and I thought, I'm going to call Stacey and see if he's willing to sit down with me for a little bit. So thank you very much for
Yeah.
agreeing to do this.
Well, thank you for doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. So since I don't know you as well as I've known a couple of the other folks I've talked to, would you mind just sharing a little bit about your background and what it was like? I know you're in Colorado now. I don't know if that's where you've lived for a long time or anything else, but I'd love to
Yep.
hear just a little bit of your backstory.
All right, I'll share a little bit, and you can tell me if it's too much.
Go for it.
I grew up actually on a farm in Atchison, Kansas. So it's the northeastern part of Kansas, and we raised beef cattle, hogs, and row crop, and then had rock quarries on the farm.
Wow.
So coming up, I was involved with organizations like 4-H, and then when I got in high school, I was involved with an organization called the Future Farmers of America, and was regional officer in the FFA, and then went to be a state officer in Kansas for that organization. And so I would say, being African American, although years ago there were a lot of African Americans who were farmers, you don't find so many of them now, at least kind of in the Midwestern part of the United States. And so a lot of, I think, my experiences were kind of from an agrarian standpoint, interfacing and weaving in and out of a Black community into a white community and back into a Black community.
Okay. When
That's a little bit about my background.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And then at some point you went on to college, law school, and essentially do what I do in a different state to a certain degree. But what took you the law route?
I always think about this. I wanted to get out of undergraduate and got out and started working for a corporation in Kansas City, and ended up hiring. I was a recruiter for the company and hired people in the technical sides of the company and people who had master's degrees, and ended up my next move was to work in their compensation division. And I began to see people that I hired that had JD degrees moving kind of across division lines.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, it's good stuff. If I want to come back to the corporation, I want to have as much flexibility as I can. So I went to law school thinking I was going to come back to a corporation, and just never did. So I've been practicing law ever since.
That's right. And you've got your own firm. You're a little ahead of me. You've actually got people working with you and working for you. I haven't quite hit that level yet. One of these days.
But yeah, we've been about 5.5 years. We've ventured out and have about 4 attorneys, usually run between 4 to 5 attorneys and a couple paralegals. And then my wife is the COO of the firm, so she does all the back office and some business development, and tries to allow us to just practice law.
Nice. I know the non-practicing of law is the stuff that usually gets me in trouble. So
exactly.
It's a good thing to have help in that regard.
Yeah.
You're in Denver, is that right?
That's right.
Okay. And what is Denver like right now? Here in Arizona, we were actually, I think, even on CNN last night. We've had the downtown protests, few bricks thrown, few businesses, burglarized, and even in Scottsdale, which is kind of the the ritzy part of the county here. What's it been like in Colorado with all that's been going on after George Floyd was obviously one of a major triggering event, so I kind of peg it to that, but doesn't start there, but it's recent started there.
Right. No, I'd agree. A couple of weeks ago, I was down at our office, which is downtown, and was coming back home. I live in the suburbs, and my son had called me and he said, "Hey, go by the Capitol." And I said, "Well, why?" And he said, "No, you've got to see what's going on." And so I drove down, was going to the Capitol, but at that time, the major street that would get me there was blocked because there were so many protesters there, and the police had kind of blocked it off. So I turned, went a couple blocks over, and ended up parking by the Colorado Supreme Court building, which is a relatively new building, glass all the way around the exterior on the bottom, and the windows go up. And was just amazed at what I saw. Just the windows were broken out, and there was graffiti, on some sides of the building. And I kind of walked out and around, and it was interesting to see. You don't want to see the destruction of businesses, but I think what was interesting to me was this is a cry for somebody to listen. And so it seems to me that it's this balance that's going on. I think things have calmed somewhat. We're working from home, so I haven't been back downtown a lot, but I think businesses are kind of getting back to where they need to be.
Good, that's good. Down here, I was actually supposed to be in the first federal jury trial since the COVID shutdown. That was supposed to start on Tuesday, and last Thursday or Wednesday, we got a sudden order from the court that said, "Never mind. We're gonna move your trial to August." And it was I think the first or second night of the protests, and didn't cite that as the reason, but I mean it has to be because we were all prepared to wear masks and
Right.
They were going to socially distance the juries, and the court it was going to be a weird trial, I can tell you that. But so I'm not terribly sorry we got another little reprieve here, but it's one more thing that made it hit home a little harder is to say this one feels different. My friend Benjamin, who's a civil rights attorney locally, he was talking with me and he said, it feels like a new civil rights movement. And in that discussion, it occurred to me that unlike the first civil rights movement, where there were clear targets of oppression in the sense that we had segregation laws, we didn't have Title VII. That's one of the things that was birthed out of that. Is now we actually have some real on the books laws. Legislatures passed them, state, federal. You can't discriminate. Okay, we now have a law that says that. And so to me, that's made this iteration of the civil rights movement a little harder to pin down or summarize. I think you're right. It's a cry to listen. But for me, it's not just, it's got to start there, but then it's listen and do what in this next season? Like what are we going to have to do as a county, as a city, as a state, as a country to affect change this time? What is it? I don't know if you've sat with that and pondered it, but I would love to hear your thoughts on where we need to head to make this actually a different and better place that will springboard off of what happened in the 60s.
Yeah, I think it initially starts with conversations like these. I would say, growing up, after my wife and we would talk, and we were like, I wonder if Caucasian people talk about race as much as we do. And I say that because, when we have two sons that are now young men, but when they were growing up, there's different conversations that we had to have with them and that we had to have with other people. I remember taking my son to Montessori school when he was real young, and he had a banana. And we came in, and it was a young lady who was kind of helping out, and she said, "Oh, you have a banana, you're a little monkey." So I took that and I'm like, wait, she didn't mean, I don't think she meant it to be offensive, but I said to her, I just took her to the side and I said, hey, I wanted to tell you this. I said, what you said could be offensive. And I said, so, I want you to know about it, or know about that and think about it. And so sometimes I think we say things without really thinking through how might that come across. I think in this civil rights movement, it's got to start with some dialogue. And I think it has to start with Black people talking to white people and white people talking to Black people. And, a lot of times I have my friends who are Caucasian would say, well, I just don't know what to do. And I said, okay, well, that's interesting. If it was your son or if it was your daughter and this happened to them, what would you do?
Yeah.
And, and that's it. Be empathetic, but feel free to have conversations. I think a lot of my Caucasian friends would say, well, I'm just not really sure how to get into that conversation. And I think that fear, and I would say that, there are African Americans who say, I'm not comfortable in having that type of a conversation with someone who's white. Those, I think, types of, barriers, I think prevent progress from happening because we can have a conversation about race and how does it impact you and how does this impact me? And, it doesn't have to be where I'm accusing you or you're accusing me or anything like that.
Sure.
I do think it starts with some very clear dialogue. And, then I think there has to be some movement. So, with the police force, it is, there are good and bad people in every profession. There are good and bad attorneys, good and bad police officers. But you watch that video of Mr. Floyd when he is handcuffed and the guys, and the police officer's knee is on his neck and you're like, well, why was that necessary? There was nothing, he was handcuffed. I don't understand why that was necessary. And so I think having some, dialogue with police forces about, what are we doing? And I understand, they do a very difficult job that I'm sure, every time they approach someone, they're probably fearful of their, for their safety, but there's got to be a balance because it's just not working.
Well, fearful people tend to do the most, I don't know, fearful people tend to cause a lot of harm, I would say. That is a general rule. Finding somebody when they're afraid is like finding them at their worst, usually, in terms of reactions, in terms of hyperbole, what they say, what they do. I don't know too many fearful people that act in the way that they would if they were approaching something. If you know the guy in the car that you pulled over, you react a little differently than if you don't know the guy. That's one of those things that I've often wondered about. Is I have a friend in the military. She said that with the level of PTSD, when the police are hiring a lot of soldiers, they're coming back. It's hard to set aside a wartime mindset when you're policing a civilian population, especially if you've been overseas and your enemy over there can be civilians. You don't know walking down the street if this man, this woman, or this child is someone who's got a bomb, who's got a gun, who's got an ID, who's got a trigger, who's got a vest. And you bring that home and say, now police our streets. It's going to be really hard to not carry that, if not fear, that apprehension and anticipation constantly.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's what we're seeing. I don't know if you saw this. I saw today for the first time that 2 of the 4 police officers involved in Minneapolis were trainees. And so when you ask why was it necessary to kneel on George Floyd's neck, part of me wonders is how much of that was the trainer showing off for the trainees, or exploring the limits of what he can get away with and proving a